was no more than a hulking mass of iron.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of DumpStat. I am the Archlich, the Master of Death, which is important for today's topic. And next to me, of course, is the lovely and beautiful Doc, the level 12 human fighter who will inevitably slay me. I forget what level we said you were. Is it 11 or 12?
I think it's 12. I'm waking up. So I don't quite remember.
Fantastic. I'm glad that amnesia juice is working.
It's real good stuff. That weird dreams, though. Well, you were like knitting in my room at one point, talking about your grandkids. Was that real?
Anyways, so I wanted to dive in kind of head first into this topic. But first, I want to paint a picture before we really get into it, to the nitty gritty, because this is a big topic.
Yeah.
The idea of player character death. So imagine that you are a dwarf, a mountain dwarf, a barrel-chested, meaty unit of a creature, and you are with an adventuring party trying to get a MacGuffin from an enchanted forest. But you decide, since you are a wise and cunning dwarf, to split off from the party and make your own way. While you go about the land, you look across the many fields and trees, looking for said MacGuffin, because that elf in your party doesn't know what he's talking about.
It's true.
You've slayed goblins, you slayed orcs, you know how to adventure. You're old, you're wise, your clan has been training you for years. But as you're traveling across alone, you hear a snarling coming from behind you. You whirl around, and there is the green, hideous visage of a troll. And only with a couple of swipes past your heavy armor class, it crits, it gets some very interesting and good hits on your body, and it hits your jugular. You're downed. You're dying. You think, oh God, this is supposed to happen to the orcs I kill, not me.
Rip.
And like that, you are in the position that many other adventurers have been in before you. You are about to cross the veil, off this mortal coil. You're about to meet Moradin or somebody else. And with that, you pass. The troll eats your corpse or something.
Nice touch.
As a lich, I must say, death is awesome. But undeath is better. So when it comes to D&D, death is a part of the actual game. Wouldn't you agree to that?
Yes, I do agree to that.
It's a combat simulated story where adventurers are killing things all the time, and just by simple consequences, you will also die, most likely in some of these encounters, especially if your DM is a prick. So, with that in mind, players going into Dungeons & Dragons need to be aware that there is a mechanic for dying. When your hit points enter 0, you become unconscious, and there you will be making death saves. 3 failed death saves means that you have perished.
Womp womp.
There are many ways to bring a character back from the dead, revivify, resurrect, but death is a thing that is a part of the game because it's a part of storytelling. Do you remember the first time a character of yours died, or you as a DM killed a character?
Which one of those two do you want me to answer first?
How about the player character first? The player character is always interesting.
I'm going to say his first name, and you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about. Ryan.
Okay.
And Ryan, if you're listening to this, I love you, buddy. This situation was interesting. I was fairly new to running Dungeons & Dragons, and Ryan had a wonderful character named Fortunate Moniker. And Fortunate Moniker was a mess as a person. Fortunate Moniker had a super tragic backstory where they had everyone they knew and loved killed at sea. And essentially, one time while we were playing, some sailors coming out from sea were unloading the bodies of their dead cohorts off of the ship. This triggered Fortunate Moniker's memory. And as Ryan rolls a dice randomly at the table, I'm like, what are you rolling that for? And he's like, to see if this character thing happens. And then he's like, I've rolled a 4. And I'm like, is that good? And he says, no. His character goes into a spree His character is flailing around, screaming bloody murder, and he decides that he's going to just attack the nearest person to him. I roll a dice, and that dice indicates that that person is a child. He crits that roll and kills the child immediately. So, given this very unfortunate circumstances for a fortunate moniker, he starts going insane in the middle of the town, and literally all of his party members and the town guard just rush in, and one of the other players does a crit hit on him and completely slices the dude in half and kills this character.
Wow.
It was a fun time. It was a very interesting time, and I had no control over it.
Okay.
Well, okay, I had a minor amount of control over it, but
Right. But when you're a wow, I feel like we're gonna have to do a whole episode on
Fortunate Monitor or Ryan.
No, not at all. That character is dead and gone and not even interesting to me. On PvP, on player versus player, because that I always find that to be a very interesting waters to enter when you're in DM, when players in a party might naturally, for the story, start to butt heads to the point where combat is going to be initiated.
And is a solution. Now, I will tell you the second story that I have is very much so not that, right? This is more of a classic setup. My characters were in the middle of a large campaign, and they basically are in the middle of these woods where they kind of expected an ambush from this character, and they were right. This enemy character kind of comes out with some forces, and they battle him, and they're winning. It's like, oh, goody. Well, this character's boss shows up with his guys, and his guys are meaty, and they are
thick.
Yes, they are thick,
downright thick. I dare do say
they're thick units. And they are ready to kick some butt. And the boss's boss, kind of starts going over this, this monologue and like, oh, well, you could join me and we don't have to kill any of you. And the one character says, I'm not taking any of that, and I'm going to rage and I'm going to charge him as a barbarian. And so he does that. He did not know, but this character was a mind flayer. This big boss dude was a mind flayer.
Oh no.
But he was masked and you couldn't see that. So this barbarian's running towards him.
Wait, he was masked? Were there tentacles falling out of the mask?
He wore this
did he braid his tentacles up into a mask?
Sort of. So he had this large he had this large cloak.
I'm sorry. It's like, how do you put a mask on Davy Jones? It's the beard.
Yeah, so he had this magical mask that went over his face and kind of went over.
Okay.
Yeah, so there were a couple things that went along with that.
I thought you meant he just picked up a wooden mask and shoved it over his face and nobody will ever know that I am an evil squid man. Glub, 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 glub.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, this barbarian gets his mind blasted with a psionic blast the mind flayer has.
Right.
And immediately kills him because you can't be resistant to that on a normal daily basis. So this character falls dead in front. Well, not dead, but falls unconscious right in front of the mind flayer. And so you know what the mind flayer does the next turn?
Eats that brain, bro.
Yep. He takes off the mask, revealing to everyone that he's a mind flayer, and not just a mind flayer, but a mind flayer devouring on the corpse of this poor character. It was probably one of my greatest reveals I've ever did, and it was the one character death that I was equally sad for, but also equally very pleased about, just because it worked splendidly. It worked splendidly.
That's the strange melancholy of DMing, isn't it, though?
It is, yeah.
Just because I think that when you're a starting DM, you have this weird gut feeling to you're looking through all the monster manual and the DM's guide, and your mind is just aflush with possibilities.
Yeah.
And just scene possibilities. I don't think your brain is flushed with character beats or development. I think you're thinking, let's use the dragon. I want to use the dragon.
Yeah.
Or you might even say, oh, wouldn't it be crazy if I had a party and in the first session, I just murked them with a high-level demon. And while that can be fun, I don't want to push against that. I think DMs who DM for a long period of time start to evolve into there are better ways to make consequences for players besides death. You don't need to be Dark Souls or George R.R. Martin to really convey a good story.
It's true.
And constantly killing your players isn't necessarily the way to go. Because I started off in that realm a bit more. I wanted to really hit hard with consequences and make a brutal world just because H.P. Lovecraft, Berserk, and Dark Souls are things that I worship at the altar at all the time as a nerd.
Yeah.
So you want to have that, that impact. However, through DMing, I realized there are better ways to make an emotional and physical impact. My philosophy is if you get into a fight with anything, it should make an impact on you as a player, on the story, or both.
Yeah.
So when you're actually fighting something, whether it be something small like goblins or something big like a mind flayer, it should inherently infect what is going on with you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever been in a physical altercation before, Doc. In space time.
Stepping out of the veil of suspended disbelief for just a second. No.
And that's good. That's good to hear that you're a functioning member of society. Yeah. I am going to say that I've been in, we'll just say contact sports.
Yeah.
And anybody who's actually ever gotten their bell rung or actually hit can attest to the fact that it does change you a little bit. Not earth-shatteringly. You're not going to switch religions. You're not going to break up with your girlfriend. At least I hope not. But what it does do is it puts a different new perspective on life. And I think that anytime any player faces down a monster, the consequences of that fight should not always be dire, but there should still be consequences.
Yeah.
You can make it very simple, like Star Warsy, you fought a monster and you lost a limb, or they maybe didn't do what they should have in that fight. Maybe there was a lot of collateral damage, or maybe they fought, let's say again, a Nothic or some kind of intelligent type monster or villain who is going to come back later on, who is going to come back with more forces. Maybe it's sworn a vendetta against them, or you could even do something closer to the idea of maybe you have a player who fights a monster and halfway through fighting a monster realizes, oh shit, I'm the bad guy.
Right.
I just stabbed a pixie, who is legit just being a nice little pixie or something like that. There's ways to elaborate a story that don't always need to end in the demise of a character, even though that tool isn't something to completely negate in storytelling. It is important.
Yeah.
But you can let a lot of the air out of the bag if halfway through a campaign, you kill off a character. Imagine halfway through, let's say, Star Wars, they killed Princess Leia, like early to mid spot. She just gets murked by Darth Vader. Or Grand Moff Tarkin just pulls out a pistol when she sasses him and just
it's done.
2 in the head. Yeah. It's a darker story, and some of you edgelords might go, yes. No, it's not better, though.
Right.
It's not improved. It's not enhanced. It's kind of gratuitous and silly. So I don't want to tell people not to kill their players as a DM. However, know that there's more in your tool set. Know that there's more that you can do. You're an author. You can do more than just lay waste to a party. And I know there's always going to be those guys who are like, TPKs are my favorite thing, man. Total party kill, bro. Those guys are what we call in the business stupid. And we need to point those stupid guys out and go,
And I'm actually going to come at you from a little bit of the opposite angle.
Oh, no.
And say that sometimes player death is just the thing that you need in your campaign.
It's just the spice you need on the rack.
When I first started DMing, I was actually quite the opposite, where I didn't want to kill any characters. I'd, fudge the dice.
Oh, really?
I'd do all this stuff to prevent that
You're
from
so
happening.
nice.
Yeah, I know. Oh, thanks. But I would do whatever it took really to not kill characters. And then slowly I kind of bent off of that. What I ended up finding is that I really held back on some of the things that I wanted to do, on some of the encounters that I built, and on some of the things that I set up because I didn't want to kill characters. And I thought to myself, sometimes, even if there are consequences for not dealing with this thing correctly, or not completing this combat correctly, or, two people getting downed during this combat, sometimes you just need somebody to die to put in that, emphasis.
Right.
And I think that, like what you said, sometimes like when your bell gets rung for a party, that can be with consequences, right? Like, oh, well, this guy escaped because you were too busy killing all of the goblins or something like that. But sometimes that
you were too busy genociding that tiny race over there, you monsters.
Sometimes that bell being rung is the fact that somebody just died. And I've found that no matter what the reason that happens, whether it's a kobold that had a stupid lucky shot and happened to crit kill you as you fell into a spiky pit of death, and just circumstances abound, or if it legitimately was, hey, this big thing that was way over leveled for you guys came in, you did not run, and it ate you. I think both of those circumstances can tell the players like, oh, we need to, look at this in a different way. And I mean, as far as the story goes, right, like taking your Princess Leia example, Princess Leia was a core character, and Princess Leia existing, if she had gotten killed, then in like The Empire Strikes Back, like that would have been terrible and it would have been awful. But I also think, what would have happened to the story if Princess Leia got killed in The Empire Strikes Back? Like, if you actually...
Maybe that was a good idea that Grand Moff Tarkin decided to just blow her brains out.
I mean, and if you really think about it, like, and how... What if Luke almost gets killed and the rest of the group has to come in and save Luke? But what if one of them dies in that rescue mission in an effort to save Luke Skywalker? One of them dies.
Well, I mean, Han Solo being dipped in carbonite when it was released was sort of a death.
Actually, that's very true. I didn't even think about that.
Right.
Let's go off of that because, Han Solo at that point was thought to be dead, because we've never seen anything like this before in cinema. And it's like, yep, yeah, guy's done. That is a super dramatic thing where like this person died because of this mission. And it's a wake up.
Well, nobody knew that Gandalf was going to pull a Jesus and come back as the White.
Right.
When he fell with the Balrog, that's Kaputzi. I agree that it builds consequences. Yeah. I think the thing that you and I are building off of is don't put too much pepper in it, but pepper's still important to the recipe.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, not too much salt, but just a little bit, and it's good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to remove that as a tool. I think the only thing I was speaking to was from my own experience and from seeing other players, like even players in our little community, like when the fudging dice episode we did a little while ago came out, I talked to a couple of people who listened to it, and I had a few people going like, not me, bro. Not me, bro. If I don't fudge dice, man, and if they die, they die, and I like it when they die. I'll just throw 3 great black dragon ancient worms at them and see what happens, man? May the dice fall where they may, man.
Oh, gosh.
And you're like, really? Because I do believe that DMing it's not planning.
Right.
You're not planning a session. You are placing dominoes. Frankly, you are the consequence coordinator half the time. So I understand if you fuck with the wrong NPC, he might just fuck with you back a little too hard.
Right. We've talked about some like the consequences that you can put into your game and maybe using that as an alternative. But my question really would be, if you've got characters that are dying in your games, what happens, like both in and out of game? Like, how do you handle that outside of the game with people at your table? And how do you handle that from like in game? Are there funerals that happen? Is there a rescue mission? Do you just go to the local cleric and have them revived? How do you handle that?
It depends on the setting. And I'm glad you asked it before I did, because this is definitely something that I feel like we should definitely go over. When we're talking about dealing with death, there is a strange mourning of a character, especially a character that's been loved and used for campaigns, sessions. I figured out after the first time I actually killed a player that I was like, whoa, that was cool. That was a great story beat, right, man? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, you used a part of yourself to create something, because that's what a character is. It's a reflection and an angle of your personality that you're spewing into it. It might be an escapist fantasy, but that's still a piece of you, or maybe an idolized piece of you that you want to be or that you want to create. So when you kill a character, you are killing a piece of that person just a little bit, whether it's their creation or a reflection of them. So there should be respectful speakings.
I want to note that there was some sort of study. I didn't think that we'd talk about this specifically, so I don't have it, but there was some sort of study that basically indicated that the more time you spend with someone, the more real they are to you, right?
Right.
Like if you meet someone once, their existence is not very real to you. I know that sounds very weird, but like our brains literally put like a physicality and realness to people the more time that we spend with them.
Right.
And even though it's imagination, when we do that with fictional characters, the same sort of effect happens, where the more time you spend with the fictional characters, whether it's in a book, watching a movie, or playing Dungeons and Dragons, they become more real and tangible to your brain. And when that character dies, even if they're fictitious, that's why people cry over stories and movies and even characters.
It makes sense if you're a player who's playing weekly the same character for hours on end.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to grow an attachment to it. Besides the fact that you birthed it, like, let's move that out of the way. You are it for hours on end. So I can definitely agree that it makes it more tangible. I read the Harry Potter books. Harry's fucking real. Okay. Fred and George, hell yeah, man. You know, I get that. So that means when you're a DM and you kill off a player's character and you undergo that process, I think you should make it respectful. I think you should be tasteful. I think you should never go, haha, you died. In the same way, almost when when a person dies, you should kind of have that somber attitude towards it. It's one of the reasons why when I kill off characters, even if they died by, let's say you said a rogue kobold crossbow bolt or something like that, something that frankly they shouldn't have died to. If they do die to that in one of my campaigns, I'm going to try and build something that is still respectful to them. They get shot, they sputter back, they think about their loved ones, they say a last word to their party and comrades that is of advice and maybe of avenge me if it's a barbarian. And then they sputter back and they pass. And they might even like give the kobold an old wink and a nod. Because you never want to be that guy who just goes, you died, go fuck yourself. You don't want to be rude like that. So I think that you're right to bring up this study. And I think there is that, I don't know, somber, respectful thing you got to do. And, maybe take Matt Mercer's advice, because I know he did a full video on player death. Where he's like, go out with your buddies, have a drink, talk, and then eventually say, hey, let's get working on that new character.
Right.
That could be fun. But I also think that, death can also be an option to spin off into the greatest campaign setting you can ever have. Your friend dies that you want to bring back. Maybe you got to pierce the veil. Maybe you got to jump into the unknown.
And just mentioning Critical Role in the second season, spoilers. So skip ahead like 2 minutes if you haven't seen the second season. But
Goblin, do a spoiler like blaring siren or something.
Goblin. All right. So character dies, and it's tragic, partially because it happens so quick. I remember listening to the episode, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, character, just saying his last words. Wait, why? And I had to like zoom back a minute or two because I didn't realize he was dying. It was shocking and it was horrible and just upsetting. But that plot point of character dying, even though there was so much left unanswered from him dying, there was such a good revenge arc that happened from that when they go and they eventually kill other character who was responsible for dying, and just at the live show too, and just the energy that all of the players brought to that situation. And then in this scene where he decomposes body as if to say, both in and outside of game, it's time to move on. Like, listen, you may call me a sissy, but I was crying at when that happened. I mean, it was moving. It was just like, I think it's just because we have that really real human connection with having to deal with our loved ones and other people around us who have died, and how do we deal with that? And seeing people, albeit fictitious, dealing with that, you relate to it. So I absolutely agree. Make it a moment, bank some energy off of it, because there's going to be energy that needs to be expended in some direction. Let your players actually grieve, even if that seems a little bit silly just talking about it now. Like, let your players deal with it in kind of their own way, because that can really turn it into a really cool game, not just in character, but out of character too.
Right. And I do want to point out, us liches do not use terms like sissies. We would prefer to say something closer to sniveling worthless boob. Anyways, so building the moment, allowing the story to feel itself and work off of an energy that is morbid or sad is good for any campaign. Highs and lows, man. You're working with highs and lows. A story is a tide. It's a wave that's rushing in and out, and you are riding that to the best of your ability. And if you work against the natural energy in the room, you're hurting yourself.
Yeah.
So you need to actually absorb what is actually happening right in that moment and work it in such a way that it feels not only natural, but right for the story that you're telling.
Absolutely.
It's an improv skill to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So I do want to mention, however, when a player dies, right, passes, there is now a decision to be made by the DM, which is, first off, if they die, do I show them their afterlife? Is there an afterlife? Do I see them pass through the veil? Does the player only get a glimpse of where they're going? Is there nothing for this player? Does that player, if they do go to the afterlife and they do see it, do they remember it if they ever come back? And is that afterlife the afterlife that they intended it to be? That dwarf I mentioned earlier probably thinks he's going to be with Moradin, right?
Right.
Is going to be, Mount Celestia. It's going to be beautiful, and he's going to be crafting with Moradin to the end of time. But what happens when Moradin denies him? When Moradin says, "You were lawful good, sure," and if we're just doing the alignment chart, that checks out. But in your most private moments, I am a god of hospitality, and you are not hospitable to your neighbor.
Oof.
And you will be sent somewhere else.
Yeah.
That, I think, is a whole big can of worms for a DM to make a decision on.
Yeah.
And there are definitely campaigns where a player dies and you go to a town and there's a cleric there who can just, you pay the right sum of money and he's up and ready to go again. There's a respawn time.
Yeah.
That is a fine way to play. I almost think for new DMs, that might be the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
If your player dies by goblins and you think it sucks, have them take him to a cleric and just, cure death casually.
Yeah.
It might feel cheap at first, but down the road, you might be thankful that you did that.
Yeah.
So I know for me as a DM, I like showing a little bit of their afterlife, where they go a little bit.
Yeah.
And I usually do it publicly at the table so that everyone else can hear, so they can all peek behind the door for a moment's notice.
Yeah.
But I don't like just doing the alignment thing, because if you just break up the universe into the alignment chart, those 9 blocks, look at the top corner of your player's character sheet, say, well, you're lawful evil, to the hells you go. That feels probably proper in the sense of, what the rules say. However, it doesn't feel right to what death is like. Death is mysterious. Death is weird. And unless you just fought like a lich or a beholder that can take your soul and put it in a box, or an undead and you come back as a zombie or something, I think that death should be a little bit more ambiguous than, oh, you go A, B, or C, you go here, here, or here, right? What if you're a good character and you think you're going to the upper planes, but the entire campaign you've been holding a cursed weapon with the tag that says made in the abyss that you just ignored? What if you were kind of a dick to that little boy who was secretly a golden dragon? There's a lot of ways to play that up. And I personally don't think you can really just say, well, you're lawful good at your core. Welcome to the party. Welcome to the heavens. I wonder if there's more of a what you do in the shadows, what you do in your private moments. A paladin who's a good person could still do a rotten thing that their god might remember. And God might even send them back to be like, no. You need to repent for this somehow. I can't let you in because you legit just killed a bunch of orcs, including the children. That was a bit much, How
cool would it be if your party could do something about it, right?
Right.
Like, what if that dwarf, he doesn't go hang out with Moradin. Instead, Moradin cuts a deal where, hey, I've got this warrior dwarf. Oh, gosh, what is his name? I always have a thing for forgetting names on this podcast. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see. Lawful, evil, devil, god, D&D. Let's see. Asmodeus. Yes.
There we go.
So
you could have just been like D&D Satan.
Yeah.
Asmodeus. Popular friend of the show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's a cool guy. Brings over tea. Hot tea. Anyways. So let's say Moradin brokers a deal with Asmodeus and basically says, hey, I've got this guy who's kind of a traitor to me. How about you lay off some of my guys for a while and I'll give you, this dwarf. Okay. And this dwarf goes to Asmodeus's domain. What if somehow that dwarf was able to contact your party from the dead and say, help, I'm playing second fiddle to Asmodeus and I don't want to be here, help. And now it's a rescue mission. Now your party has to figure out, how are we going to delve into hell and go and rescue this guy? That sounds like an amazing campaign to be able to do something like that. But, regardless of whether or not you want to do that, I think having the curtain pull back a little bit and explaining some of what happens to that character when they die is really important.
I think it's fun.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things that I've seen of streamers playing and whatnot, where they really not even just narrating the afterlife effect, but kind of hint at what happens to that character as their spirit leaves their body.
Right.
I've seen a couple of really cool things that way.
The ambiguity of the concept of death allows you as a DM to really play up just about anything. So when you're actually in it and you're explaining, your character has gone past the point of return, this is where you can definitely have a rescue mission, right? In the same way of you just said, let's say that dwarf ends up in the 9 hells because there was a haggling in heaven. Suddenly he's, in the dredges of the 9 hells being screamed at by a devil. And he's like, what the fuck? And somehow through maybe some, divine shenanigans or an infernal telegram, he gets it back to his players like, yo, my dudes, help, and they're like, yo, let's get him out of there. So they can try to resurrect him and he'll just fucking leap back into that body. They can try and reincarnate him and leap into a new body, or they can do the cool adventurer thing and try to break the multiverse, plane jump, and go to the 9 hells to kick some ass to find their dwarven buddy. I think that's a lot of fun, and I think rescuing from death is so Greek and so just this classic mythological trope, entering Hades to save a loved one. That's fun, and there's a lot of good to be had with that. I also think, though, when you're building a campaign, I think how you want to handle the death and souls and how much you show to the player. As a DM, that's something to decide early on, and that can evolve as you play, and you're like, well, I don't think me showing them all of heaven is actually the way to go. Maybe I'll just say you died and you meet a reaper of some kind. And that reaper, asks you some really vague, very odd questions in this blank void. And then you go somewhere, Anubis weighs your heart, what have you. And that, to me, I think is enjoyable. I also love the idea of haggling with the Reaper. That trope, I think, is fun. And when you have a player who might be a little bit more conniving, a little bit more Sisyphus when it comes to handling death, he might know that his torment is imminent, and he might try to start making some hardcore deals right before he perishes. Or, this is something I saw in one campaign, we had a wizard who died and came back, right? He wasn't a good wizard. He was actually quite the worst guy ever. He's actually one of the darker characters I've ever seen a player play. He was great being lawful evil. However, he died and he went to hell. Fun fact about hell, not great, not fun. So with that started his quest for trying to become immortal. And he tried to become a lich. And that was a really, really fun, I guess, side goal to what was going on. I think the big metaphysical weird goals of like, I want to have a wish, I want to be immortal, I want to be able to have the power of God. These are crazy wishes and usually a villain's goal in most stories. To have a player be like, while everyone's like saving babies and helping kings, I'm casually trying to become the most powerful thing I can, which is, by the way, a lich. So that to me is fun and compelling.
Was this your story, Lich
This
Brill?
is not my story. Fun fact, I became a lich. It's very complicated. It involves a lot of fireworks and a pool noodle. It's a lot. So actually, I did want to mention this, and I know this is just like a silly aside. This entire time we've been recording, right outside my traveling lair here, there's been a robin that has landed on the fence of my garden and has been just staring at me the whole time as I'm casually talking about death in the universe. This thing, who I can only assume is, I guess, to be some kind of agent of a eldritch abomination, is just casually looking at me and just tilting its head. I'm thinking that after this, I might try to get a new familiar. A little robin would be a fun familiar to have.
Leave it to a lich to get intimidated by a robin.
It's a little robin. I don't know. Well, leave it to a lich to be very sus of a robin showing up in his lair.
That's fair.
That seems to be, alive. So could be a druid that's ready to bop me on the head.
Oh, yeah, that might be Marty. What?
I think when it comes to actual player death and where they go, this is the other point I want to make quickly. This is actually more of a weird way of realization in some cultures to the east. When you're building a character, I'm using literally a piece of philosophy to help build characters. When you're building an NPC, something that you can do is don't think about do think about it, but don't think about what they are to the public. Think about what they're like by themselves. What face do they carry when they're alone? Are they morbid? Are they talking to themselves? Are they happy? These are ways for you to think of how to develop an NPC character. And that also helps develop you as a DM. So when you're looking at your PCs, that's a question you can actually ask your player. How does your player carry themselves when they're alone? When they're not putting on a show for anyone, when they're not trying to be the hero of the day, what are they like? Because whatever they are like in those moments, that's what the gods see. That's what the universe sees. So if you're depressed or if you're sad or if you're some form of angry or malicious, even if you're a good person, if anger is a strain throughout your entire life, I'm pretty sure that a DM could use that to affect your afterlife. You might be going to Mount Celestia, but your anger could lead you to somewhere darker in the lower planes, or somewhere you can just fight for like Grumpsh, the orc god, constantly in a Valhalla battle hall. Even if you're just like a casual wizard and you're like, what the fuck am I doing here? It's like, well, you were an angry person. Yeah. You were an angry person to the point where Grump felt your fucking rage fumes through the multiverse and decided to pluck you. So not only is that a tool to build characters, but that's a tool to use when you're thinking about their place in the wider universe, where they will go when they die, and that strange ambiguity.
Yeah.
I think that's all good and fun to use. That's just a handy little tool from one lich to another. But also, speaking as a lich who is immortal, if you can avoid death, do it, man. Do it. Don't die. Avoid it. Avoid it. Oh, man. I can't taste and smell, but I like this way more. All right, my dick hasn't worked in 1,000 years, okay? This is way better than dying and dealing with whatever, horrible shit I'm probably going to have to deal with.
Man, your life must be so hard.
It is. Well, I mean, it is actually funny when you look at how many weird D&D monsters and D&D villains have this abrasion to death, because the minute they do one bad thing, they're just like, oh yeah, Orcus got me by the balls. Okay, I can't go down. No.
I think too, and just getting, close to wrapping up here, like talking about death and, who your character is when they're by themselves, I think is a really good point. I want to make sure I mention this, like outside of the game. I know we talked about this a little bit, but handling your group once a character dies and kind of how to deal with that. Something that you can have that's really cool is some sort of tradition of what happens when a character dies. I generally am not one who likes to take a character sheet and rip it up or burn it or something like that, unless if it's like
have a little shredder next to you.
Yeah, unless if it's something that like the party is kind of agreed that that's sort of like a fun thing that they want to do, because it adds to kind of a comic destruction to this character death. I know for me, I usually fold the character sheet in half, I crease it, and I usually give it back. But something that's really cool that's happened to me, my players, normally after I do that, they make some final notes and things on their character sheet, and they usually give me those character sheets. And they usually say to me, hey, I want you to have this. This was a lot of fun playing this character. So I actually have a little binder that is filled with just a few. I'm not a mass murderer or anything, but
it's filled with the dead?
Yeah, it's a book of the dead of the characters that I've killed over the years. And it's like, I don't know. I know that sounds kind of weird, but there's something cool about it. It's just a little tradition that my players, when their characters will die, they'll give me a little printout of their character and just say like, hey, like I had a lot of fun with this. I'll always remember this character, but I want you to make sure that you remember it. So yeah, it's just a sweet little thing. And that's kind of where the game doesn't have to be like super morbid in that moment, but you can kind of have a camaraderie that comes from those moments.
I think that is a good way to bond with your players so that it's not DM versus player, because when you do kill a character, sometimes that's a twinge or a feeling that a player might have, right? If a player feels like a DM doesn't like them or something weird like that, immature feelings can rise up. And then all of a sudden you have this one player who's just like, of course you killed me, man. You hated my player or my character, and now I'm dead and you hate me. And so having that little moment of, hey, do you want to be a part of my death binder?
Right.
Is a much sweeter way to go about that death. I mean, mostly I usually talk to them. I usually have just a long chat. I usually actually try to take people out to dinner a lot, taking that old tip of the hat from Matt Mercer.
I think you do that the opposite way around. I think you take them out to dinner and then No, I'm thinking of something else. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I take them out to dinner and then I make them undead. Hell yeah. I think that it's a lot of fun to try to find those ambiguous waters, because that's where D&D becomes a crossroads of different parts of life. You're telling a story, but you're playing an interactive game that affects multiple people for hours on end, and you killed something, but it feels like you killed a piece of them. So now they have feelings and you have feelings, and there's all these strange feelings that, I don't know, Yahtzee and fucking Jenga don't seem to give you. Why do I not cry at Uno, but I cry at D&D? Why can't I play Candyland without, I only feel joy when I play Candyland. It's not just a game in the sense of it's a game that has evolved into pseudo art forms within itself.
Absolutely. Improv,
storytelling, cooperation, and my favorite of all, puns. Big art in D&D. It's the lowest form of comedy, but it's the highest form of D&D roleplay. So
absolutely.
I think that those things, when they cross and they hit subjects like death, you have to listen to your players. You have to talk to your players. And if you're a player, you need to hope that your DM has the tact and strength of character to walk you through something that can be dark. And I don't think death should be something that you casually throw on every campaign all the time. You're not George R.R. Martin. Stop it. But as you said, a little bit of spice, a little spice in the curry is never a bad thing.
No.
In any case, I do have this final question for you, sir.
Let's go.
What way would you think would be the best way to die in Dungeons and Dragons? if you're like you Q commoner, Esquire Q commoner, and you're just walking about your life, what monster, trap, or thing do you think is the best way to die from?
How cheesy do you want me to answer this?
As cheesy as it goes. Maximum queso, my dude.
I think that if you're going to die in Dungeons and Dragons, you should die for people worth dying for, and you should die in close enough proximity that you can tell them their last goodbyes. Because I think giving them that last moment with your character, but also giving them the opportunity to escape or the one last thing they need to win, I think makes it dramatic. I think it makes it so interesting. And I think it allows for a little bit of closure within that group.
See, I was going to say like 3 flumps hugging you, but yeah, that's cool too, bro.
I guess so.
Oh my God, this robin is just getting closer. I don't know what to do. If it jumps me,
I think you should go take care of that. Probably.
I'm worried.
Yeah. Ask him how his kids are.
I do want to mention that DumpStat is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are going to be doing more on clerics because people have been asking us about that. We are also going to be turning a little, I believe goblins would be out by now. I think we have intentions to do other minion races going forward. Just to kind of, again, peek behind the veil, see what's going on behind the scenes with us a little bit.
Yeah, spice it up.
And we're also probably going to do horrific tests to our editor goblin later on and just beat the shit out of him. So that's also fun too.
Have fun for that.
All right. So I felt like I might as well test power word kill on Doc right before we leave.
Wait, what? Wait a second.
Bye.
Wait, no. You've just been listening to DumpStat, a podcast presented by Horizon Kingdoms. Horizon Kingdoms is a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition server that's free to play. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and join up on Discord to join in on a new adventure. For more DumpStat, be sure to find us on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe.